Okay, folks, we are going to have a conversation about how to build a references page. And I think that one of the things that, we need to start with is, how to format this thing correctly. And one of the keys is that in MLA, it's not a references page, but it's entitled a works cited page. And that works cited is then centered at the top of your page. You should also recognize that these sources are out of alphabetical order. Right? So when you're looking down here, you need to alphabetize by the author's last name. So obviously, at this point, Jones seems to be the one that would go first. Question becomes, there's other people down here like Thornton. There's this source right here that just has an editor of the preface. So it begs the question, what do we need to be putting first in here? And if you take a look at Woolstat, right, this one is the editor, and then there's a source that's inside of this edited book. And so we would have to know who the author of that chapter is, or that article in that book, in order to be able to put this into a meaningful organizational pattern. So out of all of these things that are here, I'm trying to tell you that obviously we can start probably with Jones in organizing this, but you would have to know some more information about some of these sources in order to put them in the correct alphabetical order. What I suggest is that you just write out your bibliographic entries first, and then we can alphabetize them later. One of the things that you are going to need to know also is that these sources are in a hanging indentation style. So in other words, the author is out here in the left-hand margin, and then everything else that's underneath it is indented by 5 spaces. So you can take that little mark, that little caret underneath there, and you can box that in like this. This is a note to myself, right? This page number and this number right here, because essentially this is a way for me to, to explain to you what's going on. So what I'm using for this one is on page 544, entry number 28. And if you want to get to that, you can look at it. But essentially, in 544, it's an article that's reprinted in a textbook or an anthology. And that seems to be what this is. And how do I know that? Well, there's a couple of things that tell me, right? For example, I see that there's a title here, the Flowering Thorn International Ballad Studies, that I see that there's a city and a state and a publisher. That's what that UP means. It's a university press. I also see that there's a page range right here, PP 67 to 75. And if you notice, so when you just do a regular book collection or information out of a book, you don't have page ranges in there because your in-text citation has page numbers. So what this is telling me is that this article has been reprinted on these pages in this book, right, which is done by this publisher. So obviously this information is out of order. And what I would have to do is I would have to look at this, and I'm assuming, and this may be happening, that Lynn Woolstat may be the author of this, right? And I know that maybe Thomas McKean is the editor of the book. And if you look down on entry number 28, you will see, right, that they're looking for an author, and then they're looking for the information that's reprinted. Well, that might not help us very much. So we're going to look across the page at page 545, and you're going to see that they do an entry for an anthology over here, which gives you make your author and your title of the article, and then you'll produce the title of the book, which would be Flowering Thorn International Ballad Studies. And from that point forward, the edition would be in there, the publisher, the place of publication and the publisher, and then your year, which was simply 2003, and your page numbers. And then they say to put it in print form. So that's only if you have it in print form. So this format, right, page 544 and number 28, also page 545, in order to help me figure out how to produce an entry that's accurate for a chapter in a book. Notice that I often have to reference more than one source, and I have to do some thinking about who's playing what roles in here. In other words, if this person is the author, I want to make sure that this person is the author of that title. If this person is the editor, then I want to make sure that this person is the editor of this book. So, and I think I got that right because editor has only got EDs, not EDS. It's only one. All right, what you are going to do probably most readily when you're producing this this paper is you're probably going to be operating with this construction right here, which is the author or the article that appears in a database. So what I would suggest that we do is look at an online journal over on page 551, and you can see article in a database, MLA style, and they'll give you exactly what you need to know in order to do this. So I'm going to have to operate with my authors here, right? And as you know, you produce authors this way, or their last name first, and then their initials, and then you give the title of the articles, right? So what we've got here is this is backwards. I've got an article title here, and I've got my date. So I need to move this up into this position right here after the author. At that point, right, I'm going to give my journal title, which is a Midwest Quarterly. And how do I know that that's the journal title? Well, it's because it's capitalized and it's italicized. And that's what we pay attention to, right? I mean, there's a good example of what we need to know, and where we're looking at information, how we identify certain things in certain sources, right? And what kind of types they are. And then after that, I'm get my title in there. I got to put my volume and my series number. And I want to explain something a little bit about a volume and a series number. A volume, you have to have a volume in order to have a series number. So if you were just to see the number 46 somewhere in an article or associated with a journal, and you didn't see a colon with anything else with it, well, that would pretty much tell you that it's just a volume number 46. The series number appears inside the volume number. As you can see, this is the wrong mark of punctuation in here. This is a colon when it should be a period, right? So it would tell me volume 46, number 3 in the series. Also recognize here that after that, they put the year 2005, but they also put the word spring in parentheses here. Now, if you do that, if you choose spring, that essentially tells us, I mean, the series number tells us which one it is, but sometimes, excuse me, sometimes an author will, or an editor will put the season in there because there's only 3 publications or 4 publications, so they'll use the 4 seasons to say that they're doing 1 publication for each quarter of the year. It doesn't make any sense that this one is spring and it's number 3. I would think that 3 is probably in the fall. So what I would do is I would just probably take that word spring out of there and just use a 2005, and as long as I've got my series number 3, I should be in good shape. The question at this point becomes, obviously we do our page numbers, is what do we do with all this information down here? Here's the MLA International Database, here's Damon College, here's the www.damon library page. Is any of that relevant? No. The only thing that's relevant is the MLA International Database, and that's what page 551 should explain to you. You don't need to write Damon College Library, you don't need to put a web address in anything that's in an online form. All you're going to do is tell me this, the MLA database, and then you're going to write the word web after it, because web will demonstrate to me that you got this from some type of online source. So I will go to our Wildcat, I will punch in that author, and hopefully I will find that title associated with that author, and that should get me right to your source, and probably link me right to the MLA database anyways. If I can't find the author through the Wildcat, then I'll just go to the MLA database, and I'll bring that up, and I'll punch in the author's name and find that information that way. All right, probably the second most popular form of gathering up this information is going to be here with the journal that is in print form. And as you can see, I've got it listed here as page 537 is where we're going to find our best example. But we've got a couple of things going on, right? We've got 2 authors. How do we do 2 authors? Well, authors are always done by, in the same form. So if you take a look back at page 535, you'll see how they do book authors. And it shows you that they do author, that the first author is last name first, and then the second author is first name first. So Teets, Stephen, Lauren, Lodgson, that makes sense. That's how it should be done, right? A lot of style manuals will tell you to keep these inverted, but in MLA, you don't. And essentially, so that book format for how do you do authors will essentially apply for the article format for how you do authors. And then you need to go find how to do the title. And as you can see here, terrible predicament. and then a de-evolution of values, and Flannery O'Connor's Good Man is Hard to Find. I want you to see this right here, because what do you do when you have a title inside of a title? And it's the same thing here. You know, Through Our Laughter, We Are Involved. That's a title of a play. So we've got a title inside of our title. So we've had that twice. We should probably pay attention to where that issue unfolds. So I want you to back up for a second, and you'll see that Titles Within Titles is covered on page 533, right? And it shows how you do a title of, you know, when you use quotation marks, right? So if you have a book length work, then you would have this whole thing would be italicized, and then this A Good Man is Hard to Find, because it's a short story, would not be italicized. But that's not what we're operating with. We're operating with a title of an article and a title of a story inside the title of an article. So that information is on the bottom of page 533, and you can see the European roots of the philosophy of composition, and you'll notice that the period in that group is on the inside of that first quote. So you've got double quotes on the outside of the article, and then you've got single quotes on the outside of the title of a short story, but that period goes on the inside of that single quote. Everybody see that, I hope? We can keep working forward from there. All right, so back to page 537. And as you know, I mean, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to bounce around. You're going to have to look up rules. You're going to have to find, when you find something that's unique or different, you've got to go find the representation, not only in the rules of the handbook, but maybe even in some samples. You should just recognize that you shouldn't do anything unless the book tells you to do it. That's a good lesson to live by, right? If the MLA style manual tells you you can do it that way, then great, do it that way. Make a note of where you found the entry, where you found the example, where you found the rule. So if I ask you about it, you'll know how to respond. All right. So what they want next is the title of the journal, which is the Eureka Studies in Teaching Short Fiction. And then notice that there's no mark of punctuation, but what they want next is the volume and series number. And you can see there's no volume and series number here. So what you can do is you can just put spring here for your series, and then you can put your date, 2001, in parentheses, put your colon, and give your page numbers. At that point, what you do at the end of this, because this is a print article, you'll just write the word print as they do at the bottom of page 537. All right, so bouncing around, I mean, 537 for this print version of an article, 551 for the online version of the article, 544 for how we do a chapter in a book or an article in a book. Now, I've also got 548 highlighted in here, and for this article, this online journal, and it has that is repeated, and it's actually shows you some variations on this for when you have an article that doesn't have any page numbers, right? So on 548, probably a good place for you to go, shows you for an article in an online journal where the article doesn't have any page numbers. Instead of just putting the page number here, you'll put N period, PAG period for no pagination. And then you'll do everything else pretty much just the same, okay? So being aware that whenever you see something going on, right, if you see, just because something doesn't appear in your source, you just don't skip it, you just try to find a way to deal with it, and you got to reference the text in order to find ways to deal with it. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about in terms of this would be really just to shoot over to 552, because what we have here in this example, is what we call an abstract. Now, an abstract is really not a good research tool. I want you to know that it exists, because abstracts can be confusing. What an abstract is a short summary of someone's research article. Most of the time, in this case, and you see it's a dissertation abstract, means that somebody wrote a dissertation, and there's probably a 300 to 500 word summary of that dissertation in this database. It's not a good research tool, because you need the entire tool in order to be able, or the entire article, in order to be able to find out what the author says. So going and just using an abstract is not a good practice. If in the situation you do have to reference an abstract just to maybe say that it's out there, or maybe there's a point that they're making in this that you really want to use, but you can't get your hands on the article, and you can only get your hands on the abstract, All right, well then at the bottom of 552, entry number 48 shows you how to do an abstract from a database. And essentially it's just like a journal, right? Where you're gonna have your author, your title of your abstract or your title of the dissertation, and then the title of your dissertation abstracts or the dissertation journal that you're finding that information is, your year and or your volume and series number, which this will be 60.7, not with a colon there, with your year in parentheses. And at that point in time, all right, if there's a page number associated with that, sometimes those pages can be really kind of wacky. So you might see it like this, right? But what comes after this should probably be the database that it comes from. So you have Dissertation Abstracts International, the Humanities and Social Sciences as your title, right? This might actually be its own database, right? So this you might have to list dissertation abstracts again, or if this came from ProQuest, or if it came from JSTOR or something else, then you would put that ProQuest name, that database right there. Again, finishing up just like you did with an online journal, you would put the word web, and then the date that you accessed it would come in here as well, because access dates are kind of important. Whenever you find information in an online journal, right, you want to put the date that you found that information, because if that information changes and I can't find it, then there may be a reason for that. You want to be able to tell me that on that particular date you access this information. So going back up here and looking at that article in a journal that is an online form on page 551, right? I want everybody to see that example that they used on there, right, after the word web has that date on there. So that date of access, that's important. Get that. So after you do all this information, MLA database, and you put that web and then your date to let me know that on that particular time you found that information there. Okay, so those are pretty much the fairly standard processes for how you're going to follow this. Make sure they're hanging indentations. Make sure they're alphabetized by author's last name. Obviously, there's pretty easy examples down here. This is a book. This is another chapter in a book. Examples we showed you before. But the last thing I want to talk to you about is that you need to create an entry for your primary resource. So we are going to go back to that page 545 for a minute, because on 545 they show you how to do a selection from an anthology. And what I want you to do is I want you to really copy and paste this entry that I've produced for you right here. We don't have a primary textbook for this course because I'm trying to save you some money and the headache of ordering a book that you might not be able to return, those kind of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this type of entry right here. And what you need to do is you need to be able to adjust this in certain ways. So if you're using Hawthorne and Young Goodman Brown, you need to change this to Hawthorne, Nathaniel, and then in quotation marks, Young Goodman Brown. This information will stay the same. This is the title of the book. This should be italicized, right? Portable literature. And then your editors would be Laurie Kirshner and Stephen Mandel. Those are going to stay the same. This is the 8th edition. You can just use the textbook that I'm using, so 8th ed. And then your city and your publisher. So Boston, Wadsworth, Cengage, your year of publication, and this is important, right? So this is going to be modified. The page numbers for Alice Walker's Everyday Use is 297 to 303. You need to put the page numbers for Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown in here. And then obviously you can put the word print. The only reason I'm telling you to do it this way is that it will save you the aggravation of having to try to find the website that I got those articles from. So I'm going to ask you to just produce this entry in a print form saying that you're using that anthology, and then we'll just operate that. The stories are exactly the same, so the information doesn't change. I'm just telling you that when you need to know what the page numbers are in this anthology, you let me know what story you're using. I'll give you the page number so that you can produce the entry correctly, okay? So it saves me from making a photocopy and handing out photocopies. Just be able to do the linked version from the website. If any of you want to try to find that, you can actually do it as a website. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that over on page 553, right, that's how we do an entire website. And that this We don't have a whole lot of information for what we have produced here, so you're not going to have anything other than, Flannery O'Connor, good man is hard to find, and then it's going to be in a particular name of a website if it's there, and if you've got the URL, it doesn't really, that's not even something that they want. So the web address one is not a very strong entry simply because it doesn't give us a whole lot of information. That's why I'm choosing to go with this form of the anthology. You let me know what story you're using. I can give you the page numbers in which that information or that part of the book, what that's on. All right, this is a lot of information for you to digest. I understand that. It's aggravating. It's creates a lot of anxiety when you have that much information that you're trying to manage. I essentially just want you to know that this is a process of learning, and I'm expecting you to make mistakes on this references page, but I'm not expecting you to make mistakes on the in-text citations. What I expect to see is a clear link between whatever you reference in the text. In other words, if I'm reading along and you're talking about Hawthorne, Joan Goodman Brown, I want to see, Hawthorne, page, whatever, all right? So whatever you're referencing. But when you're developing the research around your articles, I need to see that information referenced as well. So you're going to introduce those sources. In other words, you're going to say, according to Joan Easterly in her article, Easterly says this about the grandmother or whatever when she's talking about Flannery O'Connor, and you're going to bring in other researchers as well, but you want to make sure that those authors are introduced and you explain something about what they're doing in their text. In other words, what are they arguing that kind of shapes up to help you make your argument? Or what are they doing that would really conflict with your argument? And you want to make sure you're having that kind of intellectual battle with them or using their information to support what you're doing. No matter what it is that you're using the source for, you've got to make sure you reference it. So as you're going through the articles and you're bringing this information up, right, put those citations in there. You're introducing the source. All you have to do at the end of those sentences where you're borrowing that information is put the parentheses and the page number in, so that I know that you got from Easterly's article, page 53 is where I can find this particular part of the argument that you're referencing. So whenever you're using a source from the outside, whether it's the primary source or whether it's the secondary source, I need to see references in there. I need to see that in-text citation that's giving me that number. I need to see your secondary information brought up as part of your conversation. Introduce those authors so that when I see that page number, I'm going to go, aha, that's Easterly, that's page 53. I'm going to flip to that references section. I'm going to scan down the left-hand margin for the authors that begin with E. I'm going to find Easterly. I'm going to find that bibliographic information. I'm going to be able to pull that source up, and I'm going to be able to read it just as you have read it, and I'll be able to evaluate whether your judgments about that are right. That's what good research writing does. The references page is simply the place where you go look for the information that you've used to make your argument. I don't trust anybody's arguments. I go and make sure when I'm reading someone's paper, research paper, I pull the research up just as you have it, because I want to read your assessments of that research and make sure that what you're saying is accurate. So I'm looking at that references page. That's the first thing I grade. I open up that references page, I scan down, I look at the quality of the research that you've got, I look at the meaningfulness of that research and how it's going to help you develop your arguments. I'm going to pull those sources open, I'm going to scan those pages that you're referencing and making sure that what you're saying on those pages is being said in that article, so that by the time I finish that paper, I've got a good, clean argument from you as to what you're trying to accomplish. I've got good support from the secondary research showing that what you're doing is reasonable, and the critics out there agree with you. Even if you find research that conflicts with yours, that you're doing an intellectual battle with them to make sure that your argument is being supported. And then you're pulling it all back together at the end with a conclusion to kind of wrap up that argument to say, look, even though this may be my position and there may be people disagreeing with me, others agree, and here's my ultimate point, is that this character needs to be read in this way. All right, this is a lot of information, I know, and I know that we've got 13 days left, 13 class days left in this semester. We've got a lot to accomplish in a very short period of time. So we need to work hard, we need to just keep staying on task and be diligent. I know that this is a time-consuming thing, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a good lesson in what your classes are going to be like when you get to college. It's not a cakewalk, right? It's a hard lesson to learn that you got to manage your time. You got to be willing to spend, 2 or 3 hours of time on the outside of class for every hour you spend in the classroom. So there's an expectation that you're going to be doing a whole lot of work on the outside. If you're not doing that work, you're not working hard enough. So on Friday, when we get back together, we'll talk a little bit more about this references page if you've got questions, but I hope to start moving on and start talking about issues of plagiarism and how to avoid plagiarism, and that's done through the use of direct quotes and the use of paraphrasing and the use of putting that in-text citation in there. Okay, folks, if you have any questions about anything, always feel free to email me. We'll talk to you on Friday.